In this Part 8 video, we will look at forever chemicals, PFAS in wildlife, birds, fishermen, and hunters. We will be concerned with how PFAS chemicals act in 4 key areas: water, contaminating rivers and groundwater; food, accumulating in crops and livestock; blood, circulating in humans and animals; bioaccumulating up food chains. PFAS contamination is a global menace, threatening wildlife and ecosystems on a massive scale. With over 600 species affected across continents, these forever chemicals seep into food chains via polluted water, soil, and air, inflicting irreversible health damage on numerous animals. From the Arctic to Florida's wetlands, no species is immune to the reach of PFAS. In North Carolina's Cape Fear River, American alligators battle PFAS from the Chemours plant, which DuPont operated from 1971 to 2015. This contamination spans over 300 miles of waterways, with all tested alligators carrying PFAS in their blood. Liver concentrations in these reptiles average 10 times higher than in cleaner habitats. The alligators exhibit unhealed lesions and autoimmune conditions, with interferon alpha genes 400 times more active than usual. This mirrors human lupus patients, showing the parallels between wildlife and human health impacts. The Arctic is experiencing a PFAS crisis, with polar bears bearing the brunt of alarming contamination levels. A 2023 study revealed average PFOS concentrations 2.5 times the contamination threshold in liver samples from over 50 bears. These chemicals, transported via atmospheric currents and ocean pathways, trigger thyroid dysfunction and reduce cub survival in polar bears by 40%. The situation mirrors thyroid issues seen in human populations near PFAS hotspots, underscoring the shared nature of this environmental threat. Tigers in India's Sundarbans and Russia's Primorsky Krai are contaminated with PFAS from textile factories that discharge chemicals into nearby rivers. Blood serum tests of 12 tigers revealed PFOS levels 12 times over safety limits, leading to liver enlargement and reducing the animal's hunting efficiency. This contamination poses a significant threat to already endangered populations. In Thailand's Khao Yai National Park, long-tailed macaques show PFAS exposure through agricultural runoff. 15 monkeys tested in 2023 had PFOS levels of 40 times the threshold and PFOA levels of 23 times the threshold, leading to developmental delays and abnormal cortisol levels. Similarly, China's giant pandas in the Qinling Mountains suffer from PFAS contamination linked to electronics manufacturing. Fecal samples showed PFOS at 55 times the threshold, causing liver enzyme abnormalities and suppressed vaccine responses. At Holloman Lake, New Mexico, where the U.S. Air Force Base has operated since the 1970s, Mallard duck livers contain 12.4 parts per billion PFOS, 620 times the EPA's safe water limit of 0.02 nanograms per liter. One duck liver, weighing 170 grams, contains PFOS equivalent to 3,100 liters of EPA-safe daily water consumption. For hunters, consuming just 1 gram of this liver is 3.6 times the lifetime exposure limit, while eating an 8-ounce portion would be 290 times the annual safe dose. This alarming contamination mirrors the situation in Maine, where 67% of hunters ignore do not eat advisories covering 34 square miles in Fairfield, Unity, and Albion, where deer muscle contains PFOS at 547 times the limit. Health experts warn that consuming 8 or more meals per year from these tainted zones risks liver and thyroid damage. Marine mammals are not spared from the impacts of PFAS. Bottlenose dolphins in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor had PFAS levels 3 times the threshold in their blood plasma. Biopsies revealed chronic inflammation and liver fibrosis, with calf mortality rates increasing by 30% post-exposure. The liver damage seen in these dolphins mirrors human liver disease linked to PFAS exposure. Migratory birds at Holloman Lake, New Mexico, face significant PFAS exposure from U.S. Air Force firefighting foam used since the 1970s. Mallards average 8,000 times the limit PFOS in their livers, while killdeer reached even higher levels. Over 100 migratory bird species ingest PFAS through contaminated invertebrates and rodents, leading to nest failures and unhatched eggs. If consumed, the PFOS concentration in a mallard duck liver in contaminated areas is toxic to hunters. The impact extends beyond wildlife to livestock, posing risks to food safety and agricultural economies. In Clovis, New Mexico, 3,665 cows were euthanized after milk was tested at 300 times the FDA limit for PFOS. This contamination, stemming from Cannon Air Force Base, resulted in $5.9 million in losses for Highland Dairy. Aquatic ecosystems face severe PFAS impacts. Holloman Lake invertebrates contain PFAS levels up to 77 times safety thresholds, transferred to predators like ducks and fish. Cape Fear River plankton also shows PFAS contamination, affecting the base of marine food webs. These contaminated invertebrates serve as vectors, moving PFAS up the food chain and potentially into human diets. PFAS contamination in game fish poses serious health risks, with measurements expressed in nanograms per kilogram. 1 nanogram equals 1/1000th of a gram. The EPA's health advisory for PFOS in water is 0.02 nanograms per liter, roughly equivalent to 1,000 nanograms per kilogram in fish tissue. Fish with PFAS levels exceeding 1,000 nanograms per kilogram are considered unsafe, as consuming them is comparable to drinking 290 times the EPA's monthly limit for water. Minnesota's guidelines treat PFOS in fish even more strictly, considering it 10 times more dangerous than mercury or PCBs. PFAS contamination plagues major U.S. waterways, and several emerging hotspots show extreme pollution levels. The Cape Fear River in North Carolina is heavily polluted, with fish PFOS levels reaching 83 times the EPA limit due to Chemours DuPont operations from 1971 to 2015. Nearby, GenX contamination in water reaches 25.8 parts per trillion from Fayetteville manufacturing. In Maryland, Piscataway Creek near Washington, D.C., shows PFOS levels 68,235 times the EPA advisory level in water. Specific fish species show concerning contamination levels. Largemouth bass in the Cape Fear River contain up to 41 times the safe limit for PFAS. Rainbow trout in Lake Seneca, New York, reach 44 times the safe limit for PFOS. Channel catfish in Illinois' Rock River average 9.5 times the safe limit for PFAS. These levels pose significant risks to consumers, with health experts warning that eating one Great Lakes fish is equivalent to drinking PFAS-tainted water for a month. Primary pollution sources include over 100 military bases with PFAS levels exceeding 100,000 parts per trillion textile mills in Dalton, Georgia, discharging into the Conasauga River and electronics manufacturing, contributing to high PFAS loads in Pennsylvania waterways. The widespread nature of this contamination underscores the urgent need for comprehensive remediation efforts and stricter regulations on PFAS use across industries. It is not just fishermen who consume poisoned fish. Hunters risk ingesting PFAS, lead, and industrial toxins through deer, wild boar, rabbits, upland birds, and waterfowl. These chemicals persist in animals that migrate between contaminated and clean areas, creating invisible health risks. Deer have become silent carriers of PFAS in several regions. In Maine, do not eat advisories cover 34 square miles in Fairfield, Unity, and Albion after deer tested at 547 times the safe limit for PFOS. These contaminated fields caused by sludge since the 1970s have poisoned browsing herds. Michigan's Clark Marsh deer average is 250 times the safe limit for PFAS in the liver, with one individual hitting 547 times the safe limit in the muscle. Alarmingly, migrating deer can spread toxins more than 15 miles from the origin sites. Health experts warn that consuming 8 or more meals per year from tainted zones risks liver damage and thyroid dysfunction. Small game and upland birds are not spared from contamination. At Holloman Lake in New Mexico, kangaroo rats hit 120,000 times the safe limit for PFAS, and rabbits grazing on contaminated vegetation likely absorb similar levels. Iowa cottontails near industrial zones show lead fragments from ammunition. Ruffed grouse near PFAS-treated crops in Iowa average 8 times the safe limit for PFOS in muscle. Globally, lead poisoning from shot affects 30% of hunter-harvested birds. Waterfowl act as migratory PFAS vectors. American widgeon at Holloman Lake reaches 38,000 times the safe limit for PFAS, where consuming just 1 gram of meat exceeds EPA lifetime limits. In Victoria, Australia, ducks carry 12 times the safe limit for PFOS from textile runoff. Black ducks in the northeast U.S. average 9.4 times the safe limit for PFAS, prompting advisories limiting consumption to 2 meals per month. Insects significant to Earth's ecosystems face unprecedented declines due to PFAS. Studies reveal PFAS bioaccumulation in aquatic insects like midges and dragonflies, up to 77 times safety thresholds, which then transfer toxins to terrestrial predators. Agricultural runoff from PFAS-treated crops further poisons pollinators. Fruit flies exposed to 6 parts per billion PFOS showed a 60% reduction in egg-laying rates, illustrating the chemical's impact on insect reproduction. The decline in insect populations threatens to collapse entire food webs, endangering 75% of food crops and starving fish, birds, and amphibians that rely on these insects for food. The scale of PFAS contamination is staggering. Over 15,000 PFAS chemicals have been produced globally since the 1960s. A 2024 global study analyzed 45,000 plus water samples, revealing that 31% of groundwater and 16% of surface water exceed safe PFAS levels. In the U.S. alone, over 8,865 documented sites are contaminated, with 17,000 plus sites in Europe, and hotspots in Australia, China, and India. PFAS now taint millions of hectares of land, including 610 contaminated U.S. locations and 53,000 tons of polluted soil in Germany's Rastatt region. The persistence of PFAS poses long-term risks to ecosystem health and human safety. New Mexico's 2025 advisory warns that consuming just 1 gram of duck meat from Holloman Lake could exceed EPA's lifetime PFAS exposure limits. PFAS levels in the lake's water range from 590 to 1,600 times the EPA's drinking water limit for PFOA and PFOS. This widespread contamination shows the urgent need for comprehensive remediation efforts and stricter regulations on PFAS use. This comes from Chapter 8 of Marko Vovk's book called Forever Chemicals: How PFAS Pollutes Our Blood and Lives. Please watch the other videos from this series. Please like, subscribe, and share, and hit the bell to get future videos. Below is a link to Marko Vovk's